Alrighty, welcome back to my channel, Made Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we are recording for the first time in a very long time. Let's see if I remember how to do this. We're going to be talking about my life, basically where I've been, as well as going over my best books from 2024. Now, if you don't really care about the personal stuff, that's fine. This video will be separated into chapters, so you can just go to the description down below and skip to the book stuff. But if you are interested in figuring out what the hell happened to me, where I've been all December, stick around, I'll tell you right now. If you're a patron, this is actually going to be a little bit repetitive because I've already updated you guys, but bear with me for a second. So let's go all the way back to November, the end of November. That last week, we went to Tokyo, Hayato, Sumire, and I, for Hayato's US visa appointment. So for those of you who aren't aware, which is probably a lot of you because I've only talked about this a couple times on and off in vlogs, and it's been years since this process began, but Hayato and I have always had a dream to open a Japanese restaurant. However, surprise, surprise, it's a little oversaturated in Japan. Our specific goal would be kind of home-style mama's cooking food, which hasn't really made its debut so much in the States. So the States has always been the market that we wanted to target, which means we'd have to move there. So we decided right before the panini, of course we didn't know that it would happen, but we started the process of applying for his visa. Of course, when the world shut down, so did that process for a good 2 to 3 years. And then in this past year, it recently started to pick up steam and move again. So we went up to Tokyo for our in-person interview appointment, which went really well. And we're essentially approved, pending a few extra documents that need to get to who they need to get to. But once they arrive, and there's no issues with them, which we don't foresee there being any issues, that means that we are approved to move to the States. And so we will be leaving Japan by mid-May, which I know is very soon. That's only 5 months, 5.5 months, and then we'll be completely moving across the world. This is something that's very bittersweet. For me especially. I think Hayato's ready to leave Japan in the same way I was ready to leave the States. But we know it's the best choice for our little family right now. There was a period of time last year where we seriously considered pulling out of this process because of the changes that are happening in the States right now. But overall, we decided that it would be a net positive for us, so we're going to go for it. So we'll be moving across the world this year. Don't worry though, the Japanese content is not going anywhere. It's not going to be gone for good. Sumire knowing her roots is extremely important to Hayato and I, and we're very close to the Japanese side of the family. We want Sumire to spend time with her grandparents here, speaking Japanese, all of that. So we will be making trips back to Japan quite frequently. At least that's our goal anyway. But with that huge update, that means that in the next 5 months, I really want to focus on the Japan life content that, has always been a part of my channel, but I would like to focus on showing you guys a couple things that maybe I hadn't thought to show you. But now that I'm about to move, I'm like, oh, that might be interesting for people to see. So leave me a couple comments down below. Let me know if there's something you're interested in seeing in Japan before we move. I don't know if you want to see convenience stores, if you want to see more sit-down videos where I talk about some Japanese culture from the perspective of someone who's lived here for almost, 10 years at this point. Not from a tourist perspective, but someone that lives here. Let me know if there's things that you'd like to see because I would love to provide that for you guys. Now that I've spent an inordinate amount of time talking about the first update, let's move on to the next thing that happened. So then December rolls around and I had planned a couple months in advance to get ankle surgery in mid-December. So in order to prepare for that, I had to do a bunch of consulting sessions for one of my jobs to make up for the time that I would be taking off in order to keep my clients on schedule and to match their work schedule as well. So I have never been more dependent on caffeine than at that point in my life. I was just working in the beginning of December. And then of course Sumire came home with a a nondescript cold of some sort from her nursery school, as you do, and Hayato and I both caught some semblance of that, so I was kind of working through that. But thankfully, I did finish my work, and I was able to recover from the cold in time to get my surgery, which went as planned. I spent a week in the hospital, and I was in a cast until the 27th, but now I am out of the cast. I wear a supporter. Supporter, that's Japanese. I wear a brace. And with the brace, it feels quite stable. I am healing well. It's going to take a couple months for me to actually be able to move around like I want to, but it's looking good. So that means that the holidays were very healing focused, spent a lot of time with family, working on getting better. So that's what happened from November to December. It was just a whirlwind. It was so much going on. So in the beginning of the month, physical reading was just not happening. I was slowly chugging along on my Stormlight Archive reread, which that vlog is going to be coming out very soon for you guys. But in the second half of the month, while I was kind of focusing on recovery and was in the hospital, I was able to pick up some books, and that reminded me how much I love reading. So I really want to protect that reading time going forward in 2025 and just allow myself that space to fall in love with it again. So basically that's what happened in December and why I wasn't here. I just didn't have the time, the brain capacity, the ability to, one, read, and two, make content out of that reading. But after having taken the time to heal and really settle down and enjoy family time for the holidays, I feel ready to get back to this, excited to get back to this. So let's start the year back with making content with one of my favorite videos to make every year, which is my top 10. Now, I always have a rule that I can only pick one book from an author. So that means that the second half of this year, there were only a couple books that I had read that were in the running, because the Stormlight Archive really took over the second half of the year for me, and I can only pick one Sando book, right? So some of these books you may have seen in my mid-year freakout tag, though the order has shifted and some new ones have taken over. But anyway, let's get to it, shall we? These are in ascending order from 10 to 1. It was a difficult choice, but I'm pretty happy with this order. So let's start with number 10, which is The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. I am late to the party. I know that this was on a lot of favorites books in, I think it was 2023, the year that it came out. Is it 2022? What even is time? Anyway, the year that it came out, this book was on a lot of top lists, and it has been on my TBR for a really long time, essentially since it came out, and it did not disappoint. I loved this book. Now, if you went into this book looking for like a cozy, whimsical library, you know, that's not what this is. So I could see it disappointing some people who went into it for that. It's very much a more realistic look at if there was a giant labyrinth of a library, what would that actually look like in practice? And I also really enjoyed our main character, who's this like plucky street urchin type. This book really deals with the idea of being in conversation with history, right? How do the people recording the history change it? How do the people reading it now change it? It changes in the recording, in the reading, in the recollection of what you've read. And how does that history affect the way that we perceive our reality now? It does deal with information access, but with a lot of the reviews of this book, a lot of people talked about that as being a main theme, and I do see that touched on here and there, but I feel like the main theme was how we deal with that information, how we interpret it and how we choose to act on it. So I really enjoyed, like I said, the setup of this, how it was a really interesting look at how a labyrinth library would realistically present itself, like where are you going to go to the bathroom, like that kind of thing. I really did enjoy that aspect of it. But one of the things that solidified this as a top 10 for me is the reveals at the end. I really can't tell you more about this book than the general premise without giving anything away, because it's so carefully built that I think giving away who other characters are or just referencing them might ruin part of the reveals at the end. There was one reveal that I saw coming, and then another one that I should have, and I didn't. And that's the one where I was like, oh, that was masterful. And it is one of those reveals that shifts your entire perspective of the rest of the book that you already read. So I think this book would hold up really well upon reread as well. I also recall that I found the writing to be stunning, which was a surprise for me because the other Lawrence books that I've read, which is the Book of the Ancestor trilogy, while there were things that he did really well in that series, like the fight scenes, get that man an adaptation yesterday. They are just, oh, fantastic. The writing never blew me away, but in this book, it was beautiful. Moving on to number 9, The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. This book kind of surprised me that it made it on here, because was it the most enjoyable experience I've had reading a book? No. Was it also an absolutely fantastic conclusion to this series? Absolutely. And when I look at it as the finale of the overarching story of the Broken Earth trilogy, it had to be on the best of lists. There's a character from this book that ended up being one of my favorite characters that I've read about this year, which was surprising because I did not give a shit about them at the beginning. Like, I did not care. But by the end, I was so invested in this character. It kind of reminds me of what Joe Abercrombie did with Giselle. Same kind of arc. It followed the same kind of personal arc for me in my feelings toward this character in The Broken Earth. And that was just so masterfully done. The way that it ended both surprised me and didn't. This book is going to hurt you. This series is going to hurt you, but you'll be better off after you heal from that, if that makes sense. And I do like that Jemisin does give us this tiny little pinch. She salt bait us a little pinch of hope at the end there. I don't want people to go into the series thinking you're gonna finish it feeling amazing about the state of the world, but she does give us a little bit of a glimmer of hope there. And it's just masterful. The writing is amazing. Every single word matters and was chosen with a purpose. It deserves to be on the top 10. So even though this book was 4 stars for me, if I look at it as an overall piece of literature, number 9. Moving on to number 8, completely different from The Stone Sky, and that is Fruits Basket, another. This was, I think, in my mid-year freak out as well, because this just brought me joy. Is it a masterful piece of literature where every word is purposefully chosen? Absolutely not. Natsuki Takaya knows what she's good at, and she continues to give us that. It even looks like Toru. This is not Toru. Like, that's how much of a copy this is of the original Fruits Basket, but it's the same author, so they do it really, really well. If you want a little bit of a rerun vibe without actually rereading Fruits Basket, this is amazing. I think it was a web series that became popular enough to actually get print versions. I think there's 5, and I have the first 3. So I've only read the first one. I started a really bad habit of only reading the first manga this year. I did the same thing with Kiseiju, Parasite, which is Hayato's favorite manga, and I really enjoyed it, but then I never picked up the second one. And I did the same thing with Monster. So in 2025, I really need to get my act together with manga and read more than the first installment. But this is number 8, just because of the pure joy it brought me. Fruits Basket will forever live in my heart. It is one of my favorite found family stories of all time, and that will never change. And this gave me a little bit of that warmth again. Next, we have Mammoth at the Gates by Nevo. This is the 4th installment. Let me see. In the Singing Hills cycle. Yes, 4th. I can read, I figured it out. And if you don't know, the Singing Hills cycle is a set of novellas, the first one being The Empress of Salt and Fortune, which you may have heard before. We follow our main character, Chi, who is a wandering monk, wandering storyteller, and their job is just to listen to and record stories. And the only thing that really connects each of these novellas together is the main character, Chi. The setting is always different, and we follow them at a different stage in their journey. But if you like the main character and if you like the atmospheric writing, those are consistent throughout. And so it's a joy to read each installment because you don't know where you're going to be plopped down. And I love that about this series. Oh my god, but not the Wandering Kids. I love it. Why can't I think of it? A Shauna Maguire series of novellas. Every Heart a Doorway is the first one. Oh my god, what's it called?
2 hours later.
The Wayward Children. That's it. Gives me Wayward Children vibes in that way. And this installment, we get this beautifully in-depth, multifaceted perspective on grief and loss. How everyone's journey with those things is different, but can still be approached with empathy even if you don't understand exactly what that person is going through. It's just a beautiful exploration of those things. And it hit my heart. It hit my little heart real hard. Highly recommend these if you haven't gotten into them yet. Next, we have A Dowry of Blood. This one, again, I'm late to the party. Fan-fucking-tastic. I can't believe I waited so long to read this book. It gripped me from the first page and I could not put it down. I couldn't. I could not, this book would not release me, okay? I consumed it via audio the first time, and I'm definitely getting a physical copy because I feel like the beautiful, borderline purpley prose, but not quite, aspect of this book needs to be physically read. But I want the indie version of this book before it got traditionally published, because the indie cover is far superior. I will accept no further commentary on that. It just is what it is. And then after reading this book, we were so honored to have S.T. Gibson on Page Chewing. I'll have that episode linked down below. But she is also such an empathetic, expressive, enjoyable human to talk to. She will take any topic that you bring up with her and really think about it and give it the time of day and put her all into that communication she's having in that moment. You never feel like she wants to be elsewhere. So the discussions that we had on that Page Chewing really delved into the depths of a lot of the themes that she puts into her work. The idea of love as a net positive, even though it can bring pain, spirituality, different perspectives on life, just absolutely fantastic. So while Dowry of Blood does have all of that, if you want to hear more about those themes and why Gibson decided to talk about them, check out that Page Chewing down below. But going back to Dowry, if you don't know, it is a retelling of Dracula from the perspective of one of his wives, his first wife. And it is such an intensive, intimate view of how toxic relationships can be so beautiful at particular moments, and also horror-filled, harrowing. All of those things can exist in one place. I'm having a hard time describing it because it does it so well. It doesn't shy away from both the beauty and the destruction. And the only other book that I can think of that gave me that same visceral reaction that Dowry did is My Dark Vanessa. Neither of these books shy away from the dark parts of humanity, of what relationships can look like, but they do it in such a beautiful way. So I cannot wait to add Dowry to my physical collection. At number 5, another hard left, we have Winnie the Pooh. I read this at the beginning of the year. I've talked about this quite a few times on my channel at this point. I love this enough that I am now collecting different editions of it when I travel. So this is my Japanese anniversary edition. I loved the Disney Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh so much when I was a child. I could probably quote that entire movie. You could just drop me off at any random point in the movie and I would be able to start speaking along with it, like that level love. But I had never read the book. I kind of gaslit myself into thinking that I had read the book. And so then my patrons picked this book for me to read, and I'm so thankful to them for that, because this book is a warm hug. It is just cozy. It's wrapping yourself up in a nice blanket and just feeling like the world is okay for a little while. You know, it's just, it's so good. It's so good. I'm not really saying anything new because I'm pretty sure everyone and their mother has read Winnie the Pooh at this point. If you haven't, rectify that. Don't be like me, okay? Don't do what I did. Read this sooner rather than later. Your life will be better for it. I read all 4 original installments in the Winnie the Pooh quartet, so I do go a lot more in depth about why I think they're cozy and the little elements that I like in my reading vlogs. So I will also have those linked down below if you want to see my thoughts more in depth about that entire quartet. At the number 4 slot, we have The Poison Song. This is the 3rd installment in the Winnowing Flame trilogy. The first one, The Ninth Raid, swept through my favorite books of 2023 and took the top spot, and it was the last book I read of the year. That's how much I love The Ninth Raid. And The Poison Song, I read both The Poison Song and the Bitter Twins, which is behind me here. You can't see it, I'm blocking it, but that's the 2nd and the 3rd book this past year. This is a complete 5-star series for me. The first book will always hold a special place in my heart, but the 2nd and 3rd installments took the strengths of the first book and continued to improve upon them. This is such a unique series. I have never read anything like it. Essentially, if you haven't heard my spiel about this, we enter a world that was in a cycle of wars for a very, very long time. And then the cycle suddenly stopped. And one of the catalysts for that is the death of this god that helped the people that live on this planet to fight in these wars. And with the death of this god, the magic of the society that worshipped them, basically they're akin to elves, their magic left. They're also suffering from a very devastating disease, so this society is in sharp decline, borderline extinction level kind of decline. And we follow one perspective from that society, another perspective of a fell witch. Basically, these witches can produce bright green flame, but in order to do so, they have to suck the life out of something else. So they're deemed very dangerous. And once one is revealed, they're put in prison for life. So that's the second perspective. I don't know why I'm not telling you names. The first perspective is Tourmaline, who is from the Eboran society, the more elven society. Second is Noon, which is the fell witch. And the third is Vintage, who is this scholarly human, scholarly, sassy, elderly woman. And she is my favorite character, one of my favorite characters of all time, especially in the series, though. She's amazing. And we follow these three characters as they try to unravel the mystery of why this god died. We also have these giant ruins from these wars that used to occur, that have a lot of mystery and strange plant life around them, and Vintage is investigating those. So it takes all of these disparate seeming aspects and weaves them together in such an interesting, unique, just fascinating world. And so, getting back to this book specifically, I can't tell you anything particular about it because basically everything is a spoiler, the way that this is so intricately plotted. But this book had me so stressed. Around this 50% mark, I was barely reading because I didn't want to know what was going to happen to my characters, because Miss Williams, she's not afraid to put her characters through it, to make them suffer. And they were suffering, believe me, in this book. And I couldn't see how they were going to get out of it. So it stressed me out so much. But the ending was phenomenal. It broke me, but in a way that I like, in a way that made sense. So this was a fantastic ending to one of my all-time favorite series. I have an entire video gushing about this with another amazing booktuber, Aubrey, over on Bookish Blackwell. So I will have that link down below as well. There's a non-spoilery section at the beginning and then spoilery at the end. And then I also did gush about it, and I think I did a better job describing it because it was fresher in my brain, in my best of books for 2023 as well. So go check that out if you want to hear more about this. Okay, we got three more. Next is Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. This was on my mid-year freakout as well. I also read What Moves the Dead in the second half of the year by Kingfisher, and this is an honorable mention, but because I can only pick one book by each author, I think Nettle and Bone wins out over this one. This is still a fantastic book, though. Just wanted to throw that in there. But Nettle and Bone is what made me fall in love with Kingfisher's writing, with the very subtle, witty humor. This is another writer where I feel like the words are chosen so carefully. It doesn't feel like any pages are wasted, which is important when all the books are like this size. Nettle and Bone is a bit bigger, but still. Absolutely phenomenal, dark fairy tale. It has the perfect amount of darkness and humor that just, they mix so well together, and it never feels like it's too much of one thing. Something about Kingfisher's writing also captures the whimsical nature of fairy tales perfectly. Like, there's a lot that isn't explained, but it doesn't need to be explained because it's written in a way that you feel like, oh yeah, okay, I'm not supposed to know about that. This is just adding to the world and the atmosphere. And fairy tales do that all the time. They'll just say, you know, oh, there's this person who lives in a castle, this witch that makes a certain potion. You're like, okay, sure there is, you know. It has that kind of vibe to it. You just accept the premises there because they are congruous with the world. The premise of Nettle and Bone is our main character wants to save her sister from an abusive relationship with a prince, but up to this point she has kind of lived in the shadows. She doesn't like people focusing on her. She has been the kind of forgotten sibling, and she likes it that way. So wanting to save her sister is kind of pulling her out of this life that she's been comfortable with, and she embarks on a very fairy tale-esque style set of missions or journeys to be able to save her sister. It really does have those dark magic fairy tale vibes. You know how the original Snow White, she had to dance in hot shoes until her feet burned off and she died. Or for the Little Mermaid, she actually, you know, turned into sea foam due to grief and she died, right? So it very much has those like darker aspects to it. I know that I talked a little bit more in detail. I think I even put a quote from the book in my mid-year freakout tag as well, so you can go look at that if you want to hear more about Nettle and Bone, but this one also made it to my top 3 of this year, so clearly I adore it. In the number 2 slot is my Brando Sando pick for this list. I read all of the Stormlight Archive except for Dawnshard. I am halfway through it now, but it didn't make it into the year. So while Dawnshard would have been a contender, the one that I've chosen is Words of Radiance. Guys, this book ages like fine wine. This is my 3rd time rereading it. The amount of tabs are ungodly. I went through it via audio this time around, but like I threw a couple extra tabs in there when I was listening to the audio because I needed to mark new favorite things that I read. My Stormlight Archive reread vlogs are split into 2, so the first one is already out where I read The Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, and Edgedancer, and I go very in depth into my thoughts on this book in that, so again, linked down below. But just overall, I feel like this is the installment in the series where Sanderson knew exactly where he was going with the series, but nothing feels repetitive yet. Nothing feels convenient. Nothing feels overdone. Everything is at its peak in this book. This is truly what I think is Sanderson at his best. I can't talk a lot about the details here because it is the 2nd installment in a giant fantasy series, so again, almost any plot point is a spoiler, but if you haven't read the Stormlight Archive, if you've only read The Way of Kings and you liked it, but you weren't sure about continuing, I highly recommend at least giving Words of Radiance a try, because I feel like this is the peak of what this series is capable of. And the final slot, the number 1 slot, was hard for me to choose because I read 2 things by this author this year, and both of them just like changed my brain chemistry. And that is, of course, Ken Liu. So in my mid-year freakout tag, I chose The Passing of the Dragon as, I think it was my top book, or one of my top books. It's just a very short story. You can read it in one sitting, but like I said, changed my brain chemistry. But I also, most recently, so there could be recency bias here, but I did read The Paper Menagerie finally. And this, finally, and this book, the tabs, I mean, it's a lot, okay, for this, this short collection. This collection deserves all of the awards it's gotten. This collection made me cry more times than I've cried, I think, this entire year. Just like almost every story got a tear or 2 out of me, but they were all for different reasons. Like some of these stories haunted me for days, took my heart out and stomped on them. Some of them were so beautiful they brought me to tears, and some of them struck so close to home that I felt seen in a way that brought tears to my eyes. Like there's just so many different forms of beauty in this collection. On top of it all, Liu's writing is always phenomenal. It's hard to summarize an anthology like a short story collection because they all focus on different things. They're very different from each other, but I will say that there's a theme of cultural connection, the diaspora, connecting with your roots and history, the preservation of history and culture, and a discussion around whether this is something that's worth immense sacrifice or not. If, you know, progress for progress's sake is still a good thing. There's a lot of him playing with this concept of modernity, which he really delves into in his Dandelion Dynasty series. He really can expound upon that because those are, you know, thousands of pages. But he does deal with that same theme in more succinct ways here. And the titular story, The Paper Menagerie, that was one of the ones that just had me crying because I felt so seen. It was so close to experiences that I've had. And I just find that whenever I talk about Liu, I always say that he has this skill of writing about the intangible. He can just take this feeling that you didn't know that you had, that you couldn't identify, put it on the paper, and you go, oh, that's that thing I know. Like, he just has a way of doing that. You didn't know that you knew that thing, but once you read it, you're like, oh, I recognize that. I've felt that. I've experienced that. And it's a gift. And I'm so glad that he shares this gift with us. So just to give an idea of the beautiful prose, there is one quote from this book that I actually took a picture of and was like sending to all my friends and family, because I was like, you need to see how beautiful this is. I need to not experience this alone. And it's on page 195, and it's part of this story titled An Advanced Reader's Picture Book of Comparative Cognition. A lit forearm, laughter, food of the gods. Thus are our memories compressed, integrated into sparkling jewels to be embedded in the limited space of our minds. A scene is turned into a mnemonic, a conversation reduced to a single phrase, a day distilled to a fleeting feeling of joy. Time's arrow is the loss of fidelity in compression, a sketch, not a photograph. A memory is a recreation, precious because it is both more and less than the original. How can you describe that feeling of memory so well? Like I said, it's a gift. I'm so glad that I finally read this collection. There are some stories that I may never reread because of how hard they hurt. But I know that there are several in here that I will be revisiting over and over and over again. So those are my best books of the year. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these. If you disagree with me on some of them, I would love to hear your opinions. Respectfully, of course, but you can be wrong. I'll allow it. Let me know what some of your favorites were. I am so excited to be back and can't wait to engage with this community again. So please drop me a comment and let's chat. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell. I'd love to have you as part of this community, and I appreciate it. But for now, I'm gonna head out. Jenny!